This episode is brought to you by True America Multifamily, one of the nation's leading multifamily investment firms. With more than 60,000 units across nearly 300 properties and about $16 billion in assets under management. In 2025, True America partnered with Manulife Investment Management to launch the $1 billion joint venture, Anchor Point Residential, created to acquire and preserve income-restricted multifamily communities supported by low-income housing tax credits, LIHTC. The initiative begins with 51 properties, about 6,000 units, across California, Texas, and Washington. On today's episode, Matt Slepin, Managing Director and Global Co-Head of Real Estate at ZRG, joins Bob to explore what True America's affordable housing expansion means for the future of multifamily.
Welcome to Building Better Communities. I'm Bob Hart. Today I have my esteemed guest, Matt Slepin, one of the leaders in executive search, focusing on the real estate industry, someone I've known for probably about over 20 years, I would say, and someone who's been a part of the business for at least 4 decades, having done many different things over that period of time.
At least 4 decades.
You've been part of the world for more than 6 decades. But Matt is from the Bay Area. He grew up in Philadelphia. He attended Oberlin College. He and I are a similar age. He graduated in 78. I graduated from WPI in 79, so we kind of came from the same era. And a lot of your early career was spent in advocacy and nonprofits that eventually led to real estate or housing.
Yeah.
And then later, in the last 27 years, really shifted to the recruiting side or the executive search side of real estate.
Correct.
So, and now, as you told me, after all these great years, you're going to go into semi-retirement next year.
Semi-retirement. We'll discuss what semi means.
Yeah, I want to hear that. I want to hear the
it.
actual definition of semi-retirement. But Matt, talk a little bit about those early years and how they were formative to you as a professional. And I know you started out having left Philadelphia. You ended up in D.C., correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah. First job was with was it the Cooperative Business Association?
Yeah, it was with the National Association of Housing Cooperatives.
Of cooperatives.
That's right.
Of different forms, all different forms.
Yep.
Talk about that a little bit and how you led to that and how it was formative for you.
Yeah, so graduated college, moved to Washington, D.C. to chase a girlfriend who left like 2 months later. So it was...
It's always a good road.
That's the way. Whatever works. I interned for a congressman because I was in D.C. and the only thing to do was like work on the Hill. So I was like an intern for 3 or 4 months, and then I parlayed that into, okay, what do you do off of the Hill? And I looked at different kinds of organizations to do lobbying for. Not that I was a born lobbyist, but that was interesting. Yeah. And I fell into housing co-ops as the lobbying group that I would join because A, they would hire me, and B, when I was at college at Oberlin, I lived in student co-ops, and I thought co-ops were an interesting concept.
Co-ops are more of an Eastern phenomenon than they are a Western phenomenon.
Housing co-ops are probably more East because you think of New York City, but
right.
They're all over the country.
They are.
Both low-income housing, which was about half of what we lobbied for, and the other half were kind of high-end co-ops. San Francisco has high-end co-ops.
Maybe for the sake of some, I'm sure most of the readers will know, but just maybe you could define for people the difference between a co-op and a condo versus fee ownership.
Yeah, well, we know what fee ownership is,
yes.
and you have
the
deed
in your pocket.
That's right. You have a deed in your pocket. And same with a condo.
Hopefully not in someone else's pocket in today's environment.
Right. And in a condo, you have a deed to your unit, and in a co-op, you have a share in the corporation that owns the whole building.
So really, you're a corporate shareholder.
That's correct.
That has governance, which is why in New York you have to be voted into these buildings, and
That's
it becomes
right.
a big deal.
That's right. One of the interesting things about it, because it hasn't taken off as an ownership form, but they could put a mortgage on the building, which you can't really do in a condo. And buildings need maintenance. You need a new roof. You need a new boiler.
Yeah.
You have to put dough into it. You can invest more easily into a co-op than you can into a condo, but we've solved that problem because condos know how to do maintenance.
Just
and
as
stuff
an
like that
aside, have you read some of the writings that have come out on the whole issue of the Pierre Hotel, which has a co-op in it as well?
I haven't.
Yeah, that's I would say at the cutting edge of New York society, with a lot of wonderful people of an older age now that are very famous that live there.
Right.
But the hotel part has fallen into disrepair. And there's a real tug of war now to monetize the whole thing rather than to renovate it, to try to get an operator to renovate it. I was reading about it, and the Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, is the largest shareholder of those shares. So it's interesting. There's a real dynamic to co-ops.
Yeah, there's a huge dynamic, and it's interesting. Also, I was in a conversation yesterday about hotels are now what makes a hotel development work is that you're taking half of it for high-end residences and the other half for the hotel, and that now makes the magic number with the magic work with the numbers. And you wonder when the uses over a period of time get in conflict with each other, which is what you're describing.
Yeah. What were some of the things that you were doing there?
Really the co-op world, and I did this at two different jobs very early in my career, is we were advocating for some changes to laws. There was a tax law that mattered, Section 277. I can't believe I remember this.
Wow, good.
There was an organization called the National Cooperative Bank that had been established under Carter. And right at the time that I was becoming a lobbyist, Reagan had come in and he was going to kill the co-op bank, and that was a big deal. Co-op bank is still around. So those were things we were lobbying for. But one of the things that was interesting to me is I immediately got involved both in low-income housing and housing policy, and I got involved with a national group of either developers or owners of units and people who ran trade groups in their local areas. So I was immediately someone who flew all over the country as a young kid.
Really?
I was on a HUD task force on re-syndications when I was 24, and the rest of the room were, big real estate developers, and I was in the room helping think some of that stuff through. And I found myself much more interested in what those guys were doing than what I was doing as a lobbyist for housing co-ops, which is what.
So I think that's maybe foundational to some of your things that you probably had to do in search, which is selling your services, being an advocate, whether it be for a candidate or a company.
Yeah.
And that was probably a good foundational experience. Over time.
It's a good foundational experience. I wasn't scared to pick up the phone, talk to people, get to know people.
And that association is still around today.
Think so.
Yeah.
I don't know.
How would you compare it then to, say, the NAHB or the NMHC or ULI? Very small.
Tiny. This is real small business, although interesting for me is that I did become a fan, and we'll return to this in a few minutes, of what trade associations do for an industry. I think they play a really critical role.
You do?
Yeah, NMHC is essential to the multifamily business.
Very different than a union, a trade association. It's very different.
Yeah. Well, people come together, so people think about NMHC specifically, and Sharon's been on your podcast and mine as well. Doug was on my podcast. So I love what trade associations do, and particularly in the apartment business, which is a relatively organized business, friendly business. It's a closed society in some ways.
It's a closed society.
You know all these folks. You collaborate, you cooperate, and you compete with them. But there's a lot of collaboration, and trade associations help that to happen, and they lobby. But they're two different things.
Yeah. They really help, I think, build foundational relationships with people of all experience, all stature.
It brings back to one comment, if I think back on lobbying, is you want to do business with people you know, respect, and have relationships with. That's a good way to do business. The same thing, and this will be a political comment, is when I was a lobbyist, the Democrats and Republicans were friends. They knew each other.
It was collegial.
It was collegial, so the collaboration level was really high, even though there were kind of two sides to things. There were things that were nonpartisan. Now nothing's nonpartisan.
No, it isn't.
So I learned a lot kind of watching through that and the way that comedy, is that the right word? Comedy existed back then. That was really interesting.
You know, a lot of people take for granted our industry, but as I've said about our credo at True, is we transact with relationship capital.
Right.
A lot of people have money, a lot of people have know-how, but not everyone has the best reputation.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you got that from You have a great reputation in the industry. You're considered a very thoughtful person with good insight and very caring in nature. And I think that's probably through all the relationship work you did early in your career.
It's true. It's funny because there's 2 or 3 parts of what you just said. So someone said, hey, you're going to be really good at recruiting when I got into the business because you're a good networker. And I think that's the table stakes to it. That's the least interesting part.
No, the best part is you've never recruited one of my people.
That's true.
So you're very respectful.
But what's interesting, in addition to be kind of good with people, is if you have depth and meaning and understanding and you find purpose in these things and you can tie things together on top of being a relationship person. And to me, that's always been with the blessing of what I've done as a recruiter, but that was always in my body. There was, part of me, I think it's part of you, so.
But let's kind of flip the switch a little bit in your early career from, call it, trade association advocate to principal. Because you were on that side long before you were a recruiter.
Right.
And you worked for the National Housing Partnership,
Yep.
which was an early mover in basically residential living.
Correct. NHP was then the largest owner of apartments in the country. So it's called the National Housing Partnership. It had 2 names. I never understood this. Either the National Housing Partnership and the National Corporation for Housing Partnerships. And they, along with a couple of other syndicators that came up, CRI, if you remember them, it became Crimmy May. But NHP was one of the first large owners, and maybe the first large owner in the apartment business that created apartment management hierarchy structure and company and all that stuff.
So they were an aggregator.
They did a ton of acquisitions, and they also funded development. And they did a lot of
development.
both low-income and middle-income multifamily.
And where did NHP's capital come from initially? They weren't a REIT.
NHP was actually formed out of a presidential commission on housing.
Interesting.
And President Johnson, I'm pretty sure, had a commission. The commission got corporate America to each put up like $1 million or $100,000, which was $1 million back then. And it was that created the capital for the organization, and then it did everything through syndication.
So it sort of came out of the Great Society movement.
I think it did.
As a way to create other forms of housing for the private sector.
That's right. It was a total private sector business. Maybe one member of the board was appointed by the president or something. I'm making this up now.
I'm trying to think of a modern day corollary to that today. If there's anything like that has ever been done since then, or is it all really driven by the private sector? I mean, you have Habitat for Humanity, which is a nonprofit.
I don't think we have a for-profit business that looks that way, particularly in the apartment business.
Well, they'd argue that Fannie and Freddie is a for-profit business,
Yeah,
even though it's owned by the government.
Yeah. So there's quasi-public things all over the place, and that would be probably what this was. But this was definitely a private company thing that started out of a public adventure.
So talk a little bit about the things you were doing there in those early days.
Right, they were crazy. So I found myself less interested in lobbying and selling and more interested in what is this real estate thing. And so I was looking for a job, met a guy named Bill Cummings, who was co-led the business or the acquisition business, and they were looking to do congregate care.
Okay.
So retirement housing.
So early form of senior housing.
Early form of senior housing. And in the co-op world, that was one of the burgeoning areas that I had spent some time on when I was doing that lobbying.
Were they age restricted, or how did they
we were looking to do what was then called congregate care, and listen to my podcast with Deb Cafaro from Ventas, because they still call it congregate care. She told me.
I heard her say that. That was a great podcast, by the way.
Thank you. But we thought we were going to get an average age of 65, which then was really old because I was 30 or whatever. But maybe 65, maybe 70, 72, and it turned out that the average age of people who enter into congregate care is about 82, 83, largely women.
Today or then?
Even today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, not even today. Yes, today and then too. So we were all off on what our expectation was about that business.
Yeah.
So it was closer to people ready for the nursing homes. You needed insecurity. This wasn't active adult because we were building with dining rooms and stuff like that.
What that category of housing speaks to is something I've said when people ask me about rentership versus ownership, is that when you really look at the whole life cycle now, from student housing through congregate care or senior housing, with the lifespan going longer,
Right.
there's just a longer period of living in a congregate rental setting.
Right.
It's much longer and much deeper.
Right. Well, also, you just did a barbell to it, because if you think of student housing, and one of the things I thought when I was 28 years old at NHP developing congregate care, I wanted a dorm. I thought, my grandmother might be interested in moving to a dorm because I loved my dorms at Oberlin College. But in some ways, it's returning to that.
Yeah.
And that's a fascinating part of what that is, because living together to help extend life for people, particularly after someone's spouse dies or something like that.
Yes, and I noticed Debbie had said that as well, which I had agreed with. Now you have this movement that hasn't really taken off yet, this co-living movement, where developers are building, it's almost like an adult dormitory.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see how that does long term. But affordability plays into all of this,
Right. Big
which
time.
is why it's congregate. And that's what's really led to so much apartment development.
Right, and what it
country.
might be that I just jumped to as you said that is that it's the affordability of services, because if you get the services come to your house, some people live in places that services can't come to help support them or to bring dinner in and all that stuff, although maybe now everyone brings dinner in anyhow because no one cooks anymore. So some of the benefits of that kind of housing, they're great.
No, it's fantastic. And it's needed. More is needed, actually.
Absolutely.
So that's where you really cut your teeth more as a principal.
Yep.
Okay.
Ran spreadsheets. We ran the first spreadsheets with floppy disks. We had a room where I had to create spreadsheets, and there was
What kind of software were they using then?
Lotus
Fortran
123.
or-
I
Lotus,
never
yes.
particularly learned Excel because I was a Lotus guy, and
You
I
were
learned
Lotus
it,
123.
and I crashed the program.
Which was a Microsoft product, as I recall, wasn't it? Or was Lotus its own?
No, it was Lotus. It was separate. Microsoft stole it by doing Excel.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, so Lotus kind of went away.
very much so.
Yeah. So you were a Lotus ninja
I was a Lotus Ninja, which does one no good.
before there were Excel ninjas. So that morphed itself into more private sector.
Yep.
You did a brief stint in the mortgage area with the division of Wells, Riley Mortgage.
Yeah.
And then you got into development, it sounds like, within Northern Virginia.
Yep.
Talk about that transition.
Yeah, so I also briefly worked. This was the time of the S&L crisis, so things were falling apart in the real estate business.
The early stages of it, the early 90s.
Stages, right. So when I left NHP was not going to be successful at its syndication model, which were group syndications and that whole business, master limited partnerships.
Yes.
They all died. So NHP...
Well, they were all stacked on a bunch of passive,
Exactly.
losses that,
Exactly.
I was involved myself in liquidation of a very big MLP.
Yep. So that, I had to leave NHP. I went to a mortgage company briefly, and then I found myself at NV Commercial, which was a local developer, owner, related to NV Ryan, which is a big home builder in Northern Virginia. And I did some asset management, some finance. And the major project I worked on was the development of a proposal for the Loudoun County Government Center in Leesburg, Virginia. And they wound up not choosing anyone, but we spent a ton of dough, unfortunately, to go win this development.
That's called pursuit cost, Matt. We have it all the time.
All the time. So there was heavy pursuit cost, but that business also died. Interesting story is they had a contest every year, and they had a trip every year if the whole company beat the contest. We beat the contest. The whole company went to St. Martin for a 3-day holiday that was paid for 8 months earlier before the company knew that it was bankrupt. So we all came back, and over the next 6 months, everyone lost their job from there. And
Well, the early 90s were a tough period. I navigated them myself. And
Yep.
So you joined the big government takeover group known as the RTC
that's right.
that took over our thrift and loans that were all deregulated during the Reagan era.
Yep.
They were all letting out all kinds of money without qualifying.
Yep.
And boom, it all came down like a house of cards.
Yep.
Talk about that, because I think probably a number of our viewers are less familiar with those days from 30 plus years ago, but it's a very interesting period of our history in real estate with the change in the way passive tax laws, to deduct things, and kind of built on a stack of that versus real cash flow.
Yeah, so maybe 3 or 4 lessons from my time at the RTC, and I had a little bit to do with some of this and a lot to do with some of it. I was one of the leaders of a group called the Affordable Housing Disposition Program.
Oh God, I thought I've never heard of that.
Yeah,
Okay.
so out of and we called it the silver lining, out of all of the bank failures and all the real estate portfolios, there was a whole ton of single family homes and a whole ton of multifamily. And so for the single family homes under $100,000, we had to sell them to either low income people or nonprofits.
One off.
And we would do portfolios, but that's where they went. So we preserved affordability.
How many were
in
there
housing.
then?
I
That
have
were
no
in
idea.
the millions, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
I have no idea. Probably, maybe. So we sold single family, and we had a financing program that I helped create to finance low-income people to buy this housing.
So it's for low-income people.
That's right, because we had use restrictions that was added into the government law that enabled the RTC.
It makes me think of a sharp contrast to the GFC, whereby there was an aggregation of mortgages that then became the very large single-family clustering by Wall Street.
Yep.
Very different than what you're talking about.
Well, so there are 2 things. One is the other part of the RTC. I'll talk about multifamily, which is what I really spent my time on. But the other part of the RTC is the whole real estate securitization business came out of the RTC.
Interesting.
So securitization, the whole CMBS business started with RTC
By
portfolios.
securitizing and buying these bad mortgages as mortgages?
Yes, the mortgages, not the REO that I dealt with.
It wasn't REO, it was mortgages.
But
block trades of debt.
That's right. So securitization came out of the RTC, and then out of securitization also came the REIT formation. All these things were happening. It's like
Who
the
were
Milky
some of
Way
the leaders there?
forming
Lou
galaxy.
Ranieri, I think, was a
He was
big
one of the
CMBS
big
proponents.
contractors and did that. Yeah.
Later at Nomura, Ethan Penner.
Yeah.
But
They weren't at the RTC. A guy named Ken Bacon was at the RTC.
Yeah,
and
Kevin
running.
Bacon.
Ken Bacon.
Oh, Kevin Bacon's the actor. Ken Bacon, sorry.
I once interviewed Kevin Bacon's sister, who was in
Really?
public housing. Yeah, it was weird. I did a job
Interesting.
interview as headhunter, and on the other side of the camera was this woman who looked like Kevin Bacon, but it was a woman, but she looked like him, talked like him, and I interviewed her. So Kevin Bacon, if you hear this show, you'll have something to think about.
He's married to Keira Sedgwick,
Okay.
the actress. Yeah.
Yes, he is.
You should have interviewed her, man.
That would be more fun. Not as much fun as you. But so the other 2 other things happened from the RTC. One is it was a government agency that did a bailout. It preserved dollars for the federal government pretty well, and there were no controversies around anyone stealing. There were no big controversies from the RTC, which is hard to believe in this day of the swamp, that stuff didn't happen.
Well, I think it was very well run.
Yeah.
But I do remember there was controversy around large blocks going to GE Capital in those days. The Bass brothers had taken advantage
Opportunity
of it.
funds got their start.
That's really where it got
out of this.
started.
Fortunes were
More
made.
fortunes are made in bad times than they are in good times,
Exactly.
frankly.
A lot of the real estate business we know today, securitization, opportunity funds, the REITs kind of, but they came out of the foment of that time, but there were still no scumbags out of the RTC itself, which I always find fascinating because we think government can't do this, and it did a pretty good job.
Do you think the leaders of those fledgling thrifted loans were always on the up and up, though?
Of the Fs and Ls that had failed?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah,
because I
probably
think
both.
the government got involved in actually a lot of prosecution, as I remember, of some of these S&L guys.
Prosecution was there, but not at the RTC to keep making the same point.
No, it's outside of that.
But also, when the whole world falls, not everyone who falls was a bad person because the world fell apart. So if people who did have good business models probably ran decent S&Ls that still were underwater because everything was underwater.
Well, I think the government made an example out of Charles Keating, as I remember,
Exactly.
which came out of there. And
Exactly. So he was on the other side of that in terms of being one of the S&L owners who did go to jail.
I always say, Matt, If it's got 3 letters and it's federal, FBI, CIA, IRS, don't mess with it.
Yeah.
So, but I think we became stronger as a real estate industry
100%.
post RTC because deals were no longer built on just passive tax losses. They were built on real
Correct.
cash flow.
That's correct. Fundamentals became real and permanent because it wasn't these tax shelters that got people to do things. Yes.
So after that RTC period, you worked for the multifamily, what is it, the Multifamily Housing Institute?
Yeah, so there was a brief industry effort by the apartment business.
We're now in the later 90s, sort of.
We're in the mid-90s.
Mid-90s.
Mid to late 90s, and there was an industry effort. A task force got together and said, hey, why aren't apartments an institutional investment class? In fact, we didn't know the word institutional investment class. But apartments were not worth investing in, right? That wasn't seen that way. So the industry got together and said, what can we do to solve that? And they called for the formation of an institute and to track data to
when
get
you say the
transparency.
industry, who was the trade advocate?
The 2 GSEs were pretty big, but there's a list of like a 80 people task force. So big investors got together.
Okay.
And
people like
well, Fannie, Freddie, the Equitable.
anybody that was making large investments in residential or apartments.
That's right. There was a group that got
JMB
together.
probably back in the day.
I wasn't there, so I don't know
Yeah.
who was on the group. But they said, hey, one thing that will get multifamily recovered, and then I'll make another point about it, but the get recovered is we need to do some things. We need to standardize documentation, and we need some data around the performance of the apartment business.
To create more transparency.
Transparency. So let's create an institute to help create that. And I got hired to start that and run it. And the thing that I hung on to over 3 years at this organization was let's create a database of information. And Fannie and Freddie were going to give information. They had the biggest database of performance of mortgages, and we could dive into the properties. And so that was my mission for 3 years.
Was that a precursor to NMHC?
No, we were alongside NMHC.
Alongside
and
of NMHC.
was supporting the concept. So I was friends with, I don't think Doug was yet there, but it was.
No, this is 90s now.
Yeah.
But NMHC, was it more of an advocacy organization then than a data-driven organization?
That's correct. They were doing certainly advocacy, and NMHC had a data definition task force. The guy named Dave Cardwell was working on that, and Steve Lefkowitz was working on that, and then I was creating this thing that was going to be a database. Unfortunately, or fortunately, 2 things happened. The unfortunate part is that we were too early to be able to find a technological way to suck in the data and make use of the data, because databases weren't yet sophisticated enough to handle this.
And now we're being investigated by the government for the use of too much data that other people don't have.
The second thing that happened was the REITs got born at that same time. And all of a sudden, performance of multifamily became transparent because REITs were reporting on it, and multifamily very quickly became institutional in the recovery.
Who was the first multifamily REIT? Was it Aimco or was it Avalon before it was Avalon Bay?
I may be wrong about this. It was United Dominion because they were the previous generation. They were a 1960s REIT.
Right, when REITs were much smaller and much easier
but the first, a whole bunch of REITs came up in 94, 95, 96. Camden, it wasn't Avalon Bay, it was Avalon because Bay Apartments was one, and a whole ton of them. And that business transformed it. So the need for this database it didn't matter. We became part of ULI and then ultimately disappeared into ULI.
It's interesting. I value obviously what the REITs do and how they operate, but it seems like the REITs became less important to the industry as the formation of more private equity entered the space.
I don't want to say correct. I think I have followed that trend, and I agree with what you say, which is fascinating. For me, the first wave of scale and institutionalization came through the REITs, and they transformed the business. and also the REITs were happening at the same time technology started to happen, right? So all these happened at the same time.
When you say technology, what are you referring to?
So if you remember in the 90s, when we were a DOS-based, if anyone remembers what DOS is, you do.
Yeah.
We were a DOS-based world. We didn't even have Windows. We certainly didn't have the internet. At the property, they didn't have computers. In fact,
No, they didn't.
were scared to put them on the site.
I had
for
a giant
tons of
computer
reasons.
on my desk that was using CompuServe
Right.
in '97, but no one was really sending email.
Right. So if you think about as technology started to get at the property level, and then the back office accounting systems, Yardi and RealPage and all that, started to happen, and then the renter-centric systems began to be developed, and rent optimization software happened. All these things happen in kind of in a pathway, and the REITs were the first adopters of those things because they could afford to be, and they thought of their business as a business, not as a collection of 70, 80, 100 assets, because they could think of it both ways.
It's really the business of, the byproduct was, in this case, apartments, but it's
Right.
really the business of aggregation, securitization, and then giving the public an opportunity to invest through securities.
Right, but and one of my favorite comments, and I say this on my podcast all the time because I'm remembering a conversation with the chief operating officer of Avalon Bay. And he said something that everyone knew, but when he said it to me, I got it. He said, the day before we went public, we had 100 assets, and I ran a company with 100 different separate reports to different investors, and I had those 100 properties. And the day after we went public, I had one balance sheet. I had one reporting mechanism.
Right.
So I became a business, because the 100 properties became a business, not 100 separate properties. And running a business is a different business than it is running 100 separate properties.
I can empathize with that.
Yeah, I bet you can.
Yeah.
So-
it helped us a lot during the COVID crisis because we had then, 55,000 data points to look at to inform
Right.
our collections, to inform whether we could raise or have to lower rents. So the aggregation of data, particularly if you have it yourself,
Right.
is very powerful, call it in the modern era
Right.
of real estate, because now you have airline pricing models which are used to set daily prices.
Right.
In some ways, it's made us stupid at the property level rather than instinctual.
Right.
But it is a very powerful tool that AI and the aggregation of data is going to make even more powerful in the future.
Even more so. And what then happened is because you're private equity, you're not a REIT, you don't have one
not a
balance
REIT.
sheet. But what the REITs created through those kinds of mechanisms and pushed the frontier forward then enabled private equity to come in and still have the same approach to their portfolios. And then the other accelerant was single-family rental, because they had to take all of those systems yet to another level to solve for scattered site, and that's a whole nother story.
That's a whole other story that also emanated out of the GFC.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're now 20 years into your career. Kind of a late bloomer
I
in
am a late
search
bloomer.
in
I
real
say this to
estate.
everybody, yes.
A little bit like myself, in that real estate was really a second career and more of not a hobby, but an investment avocation for me. But yourself, really in your 40s now,
Yep.
somehow flips over due to a move
Yep.
to the Bay Area
Yep.
where your wife was taking a new position
Correct.
with USF&G, correct?
No, she was with Arthur Anderson's real estate capital markets team
Okay, USF&G was later.
before.
Before, okay, I got it. So your wife is Diane Olmsted.
Diane Olmsted,
Yeah.
yes. My wonderful
Your partner,
Thank
too.
you. My partner. She is, and my accelerant.
And your accelerant. I like that. I'm going to use that tonight.
There you go.
That's really good. So you really went from an Easterner, Philly, D.C.,
Yeah.
Virginia, to the West Coast.
Correct.
Talk about that transition, because now she's there for her career.
Yeah.
And you're there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So first of
doing
all, she
what?
commuted for a year, and we had a 1-year-old at home.
Okay.
This was a tough thing. So the transition was tough. I moved out west I left the job running this institute thing that was going to fail, but I didn't know it.
Yeah.
Came out here, I was 40 years old, and
Did you know anybody?
I knew a lot of people because, I knew people. That was my job both at the
Right,
institute
I forgot.
and
That's
as
right.
a lobbyist.
That's
So I
right.
was oriented, but you don't know what to do as a 40-year-old with a weird resume and a DC-centric resume. And I mostly talked to deal people because I wanted to get back on the deal side because I think like an acquisitions person.
Yes, you do.
And so I'm like, okay, what can I do? What can I do? But no one's going to hire an acquisitions person who hadn't done an acquisition in 10 years.
It's a big leap of faith.
It was a big leap of faith, and it didn't work. Also at my maturity and time in the industry, I had just been on the cover of Real Estate Forum. So I was like,
Okay.
I kind of had some head in this thing.
Yeah.
And
It's almost like a do-over in a way.
it was a do-over, and it was really painful and really scary. And I met this recruiter at a party, and he said, give me a call. And I gave him a call, and I said,
Here's my card.
that's right. You got to help me. And so
Yeah.
I did a courtesy interview with him, and he said, I can't help you. You're a conundrum, man. And
Really?
then he called me a week later because his colleague had quit. And he said, come join me. Have you ever
Really?
thought about search? And I said, never had thought about search. And I tried it out with him while I looked for a real job. I really wanted to work for Ethan Pennant no more because they were hip.
Now you could work in his governorship
I know.
campaign.
Oh boy.
Ethan's a good friend. He's a wonderful person. And
Yeah.
we certainly wish him luck. So that's what started Argonaut?
He started Argonaut.
started
I joined
Argonaut.
Argonaut. And it was the first time in my career, so I've talked a lot. We've talked for half an hour. We haven't got to this. But I did all these things in real estate, and I didn't hit traction. I actually felt like a fish out of water in the real estate business. It wasn't welcoming to me because I didn't know who I was. And within about 2 weeks in search, was like, oh, this is where I belong. I know how to do this.
Yeah,
And
it really brought together the combined
just
skill
did.
set you had developed
That's right.
in advocacy, in learning about the needs of the member constituencies, the businesses that you
Right.
represented, and so forth. So it really aggregated all those skill sets.
It did, and two or three things happened. One is the first 3 searches we worked on were searches where I had more orientation to the solution and the networks of people than did my partner. And I was brand new at this business, but I knew who to call. We were doing a search for Fannie Mae, a search for Glenboro, the REIT, for a multifamily person to join them, and a search for a national investment sales leader for Cushman & Wakefield. And I just jumped into them. So 2 things happened. One is I realized that my skill set gelled.
By the way, was Argonaut more? It was doing search outside of real estate.
No, just
real estate.
That's just real estate.
Okay, so it was just real, but you brought a depth of experience in the actual industry
Right.
that wasn't there.
Peter was pretty good at that stuff.
Okay.
But then he gave me these assignments to go work on this,
Oh,
and
I
knew
see.
just
Okay.
what to do. It was
Okay.
just weird, because to immediately feel at home and add value when you're 40 and you haven't really added, you've been kind of lost in the wilderness. This was lost in the negative kind of thing, right? So, so it all fit. And then after about 6 months, I had the belief that I could be great at this. And it was the first time as a 40-year-old through 20 years of a career that I said, well, I could sink my teeth into this, and if I do it, and it kind of fits for me, I could be great.
It really clicked in.
It clicked in, and then I had drive and aspiration towards a goal that before had been diffused because I didn't know what to do with those goals and aspirations, and here it was. So it was a blessing.
All culminating together.
Right. And there's lessons in here for everyone in their careers, although very, very, very few of them are going to go into search. But it's to find that thing where it all does gel is just a blessing of one's career.
It really is. It doesn't always happen for everybody,
That's right.
unfortunately. But it is a blessing to love what you do. So after Argonaut, you went with a national firm, Heidrick & Struggles.
We sold Argonaut to Heidrick.
You sold Argonaut to Heidrick.
We sold the
Okay,
business.
got
My
it.
partner came in and said, hey, Matt, it's like I'm 64, and he seemed like a really old guy to me. And but I'm 64, let's do a buyout and start paying me off to retire right now. I said, no, I'm going to go open an office across the street. I can't afford to pay you off. Plus, I can open an office across the street. I'm not like disloyal to you, but the economics would sidle me with that it wouldn't work. And I said, so if you want to monetize, let's sell the firm. And so we went to several groups, and Heidrick and Struggle said, yeah, well, we need a real estate practice. We're going to buy Argonaut. And they did.
Interesting. So that was the precursor to Heidrick's real estate practice in search.
That's right. So we started that.
How has, we'll talk a little bit this later too, but how do you think search as overall as an industry and in real estate has evolved from those early days to the way it's done today? Or is it the same?
It's done differently, but the importance, and it's done differently, and we have probably deeper market share. I've waited to become disintermediated as a search professional. Like, is LinkedIn going to disintermediate us finally? And the answer is generally not, because so the two things that we do as search professionals, and it was the same then and it's the same now, is A, how do we find people? And you think search is all about finding people. Let me get you 3 people. Like, good luck.
Well, it's not just finding them, it's recruiting them.
Right? So, okay,
closing the deal.
And pulling them out and closing the deal. So the deal orientation is half of it, but the real secret sauce to me is, okay, what's this mean? Who are the right candidates? What do you really need? I've had more clients come to me say, hey, I need a this, and then we talk it through because I know a lot about companies. And I say, no, you don't need a that. You need a this.
You need a this.
You need the adjacency to what you thought it was, because when we think of it in the context of your organization and where your organization's going, you really need a this. So the consulting advisory part of it is equal to the finding. It's like when I said before, the networking's really cool, but it's the wisdom that really drives it home.
Well, I think there's the, maybe that's wrapped into consulting advisory and so forth, but you're really selling on several different levels. You're selling the candidate to consider something, and you're selling the client that the candidate is worthy of the job. You're trying to mesh the two.
That's correct.
And competing against the interest of staying versus leaving, other opportunities.
Right.
So you're really trying to level the playing field among everybody to get that search done.
That's correct. And to make it be the right search for the client is to think through not just which people are going to fit in here to make that work well, but again, what's right for your organization? What level? You think you want this, maybe it's that, or maybe it's this over here. I need a new CFO. What's your old CFO? What didn't work? What's the new CFO need to look like? Where will this CFO take you?
Do
So it's
search
really
firms measure their performance at all by attrition rates or tenure rates of the people they recruit? Do they track that?
I've seen people claim to have tracked that, and I'm sure ZRG does, but I don't know what those.
So how does one
rates
measure when I call up and I need somebody, if I want to use ZRG or Heidrick or Korn or Russell Reynolds? How do you really measure other than, is it just reputation or?
No, it's a couple different things. Well, you're asking 2 questions. It's how do you choose, not how do you measure.
Okay.
So you're choosing someone to be your consultant. Does that person who's going to be your consultant know your business? Have they done similar work? Do they know the candidate pool? And when they meet the candidate pool, will they know how to evaluate them? Those are deeper questions, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not the name of the firm, and it may or may not be the last 10 searches the person did. It's talk through the last 10 searches that are relevant, 5 searches, whatever it is, because every position's different. And if a search professional is going to say, oh yeah, I'm going to rinse and repeat because I just did this for them, that's wrong because you're not them, right? Now, maybe it's
different culture, different company.
The lower
different
down
job.
the food chain, it's rinse and repeat. I need an acquisitions person to cover the Northeast for blah, blah, blah. Okay, there's 20 of them. Let me go find one of the 20 of them. But the higher up in the food chain that person becomes, then you're looking for a range of both that experience as well as personality, skill set, fit, future leadership. I mean, there's all that stuff that's always there. and again, I keep pushing this to that's what becomes interesting. So the way I view you're hiring a guide, and you better trust that guide to get you through this successfully.
I call making a deal, an acquisition, which probably has a similar dynamic to search, is maintaining deal tension, positive tension. And I would think that in search, that is very important to keep the elasticity between the parties.
Right.
How do you do that?
Whew. It's really interesting. Some searches have a lot of competitiveness to it. More searches than not wind up with one or two real candidates at the end of the day, because people separate themselves out pretty quickly, and you separate out what you're really looking for. You meet 10 people, it's easy to get you 10 people, but then you might only have one or two or three who you really want to hire after you've met the 10. Not that the other 7 or 8 aren't any good.
Do you find situations where your own client, which would be the firm, is very bureaucratic, they're elongating the process, the candidate is losing interest? How do you...
Each of the above.
Yeah, how do you deal with that without blowing things up, if you will?
Yeah, so a couple of different points in there. One, not every company is great, and we represent a lot of companies, and I should do a like Wobegon, we only represent great companies, but we represent a range of...
Would you say like Wobegon?
Yeah, like what, right? Everyone's better than average.
Oh, okay.
So
you could be the Garrison Keillor of
I know,
search.
I could be. That could be what it, but it's not
Can
true.
you sing though, Matt?
Yes. Oh, you don't know this? We'll talk about that.
Okay. Well, you went to Oakland.
With my dog. So one is not every company is as strong as other. Right? There's a range of quality of companies. That's just a truism in the world.
Right.
Second thing is the search and the company changes through the journey every single time. The lower down that you're looking for more of a plug and play person, you're not changing, right? My acquisition person for Northeast, got it. Boom, we got a great person. But if you're looking for your chief investment officer, you will change during the course of the search. So I will deliver you, hopefully, 2, 3, 4 candidates, all of whom are worthy, but each of whom will change your organization in a different way. So when they land, they will change how your CFO behaves. They'll change how your chief operating officer behaves. They'll change how you behave because of who they are, right? So the ecosystem of the C's all changes based on a new person coming in.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
And they're all good. So how do you choose among them? So the tension that you're thinking about is how do you create a process that hopefully gets you 2 or 3, 4 options, whatever that is, and how do you vet those options to really think about who are we in 3 years if we hire person X? Who are we in 3 years if we hire person Y? What's that look like?
But you're really projecting onto someone whose skill set you think can get you to those 3 or 4 years. You're making a bet.
You're making a bet. So, and it is a bet. And I talk about this a lot with my clients now. I just say, hey, look, this is a bet. We're going to make it a better bet, but it's a bet. It's a risk. And then you're projecting those things. And we have ways to do a better job to project it. Not that this one's a dud and this one's great, but let's try to tell the story of how they'll be on your team in 3 years. What will your team look like? How will you grow? How will you change if you got X, Y, or Z?
What would you say the average tenure is of a candidate that you've put in place in a job? I'm going to call it a mid-level position. Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years?
This is a guess, so I don't know.
Yeah.
So a mid-level person might be 5 years. I've placed mid-level people, and I've looked back. There's one guy I'm thinking of as a Prudential. We placed him in the mortgage company. I think he's still there, and it's 25 years ago.
Okay.
So there are people like that. There are people in senior leadership teams who get married and they all retire together, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to be, that person's going to be there for the duration. It just depends on the role.
Just depends. And I think it also depends on the job dynamic of the period of time, the point
That's
in time.
right. It's other themes. Sometimes in some roles, people are there as a change agent. We hired one guy for a client, and they hired him to, it was a nonprofit, they hired him to be a change agent. He lasted 1.5 years. He did a great job of making a whole lot of change. It was painful change. That's a different dynamic.
Sometimes that serves its purpose. So in 2002, you went to work for a very well-renowned search executive, Bill Ferguson.
Yeah.
and you became a managing director there.
Yeah,
But in San Francisco, you were not
Yeah.
in Chicago.
that's correct.
Talk about that and what it was like working with Bill, and was that a pivotal moment in your search career?
So Bill was awesome and fascinating, and he runs a really great company. I have a lot of respect and admiration for his business. When I joined that company, there was another person there, Deb Barbernell, who I think was in this building when she worked there.
Yes, I know the name.
And she's a great person. They didn't need me in San Francisco, so I was like a redundant entity who had to find some running room.
Oh.
And I didn't get much running room, so I was there for a brief period and very frustrated because I was expected to create business in new places instead of in the places where I had comfort and had contacts.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a non-starter.
Interesting.
Bill was an impressive man and has built an impressive business and is really, really good at bringing himself into the senior leadership of lots of institutional real estate companies. That's his skill set. And
He's
very,
definitely
very
one of the
good at that.
household names.
That's correct.
In modern real estate search.
That would be correct.
It's a great branded name.
That would be correct.
So there was not a great fit there, it sounds like, but a
Yep.
respect and a.
Yeah.
So really, from that point on, you really became a search entrepreneur.
Right. So a lot of entrepreneurs are born out of necessity.
Yes.
So I quit there. I just couldn't stand it.
Okay.
And I briefly had a partner, and because I don't want to do anything alone, and I also didn't have the ego.
Oh, it's not as much fun.
It's not as much fun, and I didn't want to create the Matt Slepin company. So we together formed Terra Search Partners.
And how'd you get that name?
One of our colleagues, we worked really hard. We had a bunch of names. One named Lenny Simpkin came up with a name, and we bought it and said, okay, let's do it.
It's a great name.
It was a great name. And Terra means earth, and
Right.
that fits real estate, and that was what our business was. I wound up separating from the person I co-founded the firm
Right.
with, and then led the firm for the next 12, 13, 14 years.
Yeah, it was really, that was a seminal move for you, and you built that into, what was it, you had about 4 million in billings at the height?
Yeah. So and one of the things that I knew early on, one is I thought, I didn't know I was an entrepreneur or a team builder, and it turned out that I had a drive and a vision to build a company that had colleagues. And that it turned out that I was the leader of those colleagues. I was mostly the rainmaker. I also had a belief in raising the bar high for what we did. And I also had this understanding right away, what that was as a boutique, I felt like the Wizard of Oz. So I needed to make a lot of noise behind a green curtain, and we did. So I began.
You're much taller than the wizard, though.
That would be true. But I used thought leadership early on as a way to be bigger than we were.
Yeah.
And
Well, you were national.
that we were national, but we were
You
tiny.
weren't Corn Ferry, but you were national.
That's correct.
And you had a great name.
We had a great.
But when I think of Terra, I think of Matt Slepin. I don't think of anything else. I mean, it was a cult of personality type company.
I'm a cult of personality kind of guy. Yeah.
You're just a cult leader.
A cult leader.
So
No one's called me that
so
before, so I'll take that. Thank
You
you.
have your own cult. So now you're reaching a different point in your life.
Yep.
And believe it or not, after this, we're going on 4 decades plus,
Yeah.
you're saying, and this has become a big part of your new business with the acquiring firms, ERG, is
Right.
how do you pass the torch, both financially
Yeah.
and leadership-wise, which is we all call succession planning.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So we had Terra Search Partners, and for a number of years I worked on finding either recruiting in a senior partner, or raising up junior partners to become people who could take over the business.
Right.
And it turned out that wasn't going to be successful. We didn't have the resources to recruit in someone, and the team that I had wanted to grow, but they weren't capable of either, because there's 2 parts to this, buying me out or succeeding me.
Right. This
And
is a problem in a lot of
That's right.
firms,
This is the classic issue, right?
which is
So-
why they get sold.
That's right. And so you could either have internal succession if you're lucky, and we didn't have that option. So then I began to find some opportunities to sell the company, and luckily, in a blessing, I found a wonderful company that is acquisitive, a company called ZRG. and ZRG is backed by private equity, so they need to grow. That's what PE wants us to do. So they were acquisitive and got to buy us. It's a great deal for them because we sell, a tiny boutique search firm sells at a -1 ratio. And once they're accumulated up into ZRG and by economies of scale, this is 4, 5, 6 multiples, so it's a much better business.
You sold Terra to ZRG at the turning point of COVID,
That's correct.
2021.
Yeah.
Were you feeling vulnerable because of COVID at all? Or
No, not at all.
It was just really a timing issue in your career
when I
and
hit,
your personal life, probably.
Yeah, when I hit 60-ish, it was, okay, what's my succession plan here?
Yes.
And one thing that happens if you're the rainmaker and you're turning 60 and you have a life, you're running on a hamster wheel, and the more people, the more successful you are.
The more you're running.
Oh my God.
I lived that movie, Bill. I get it.
So I'm running crazy, and that's just not
Maybe that's why
sustainable.
hamsters have such a short lifespan. I don't know.
It's true. So then, and my team knew that I was frustrated, so they're like, Matt, you got to do something. And we talked about it all the time.
Yeah.
So it wasn't COVID that accelerated that. It was kind of age that said, I have to have an option. And I got my wife was pushing this, and then I had an unsolicited offer, which was the wrong offer. It was some guy who had like 3 guns behind him on the wall, and I'm like, I can't work for this guy with 3 guns behind him.
Yeah.
But
No, I couldn't either.
yeah, so we went through a process and wound up finding ZRG, and it was a blessing. You hold your nose when you do an M&A, no matter how much due diligence you do, because you don't know what it's really going to be like when you land.
You just don't know until you're there.
That's right. And this was a blessing.
And it sounds like they have a great culture there.
Great culture. I had a co-head of real estate. I didn't want this to be all on my shoulders. And a guy named Kevin Jones, who's wonderful. We've been wonderful partners. And that enabled...
So you really headed up their real estate practices at that point.
That's right.
With Kevin.
Kevin and I co-head the real estate practice. We then bought a company called Helbling and Associates that does real estate facilities out of Pittsburgh. Helbling.
H-E-L-L?
It's like Hellbent. No, H-E-L-B-L-I-N-G. Helbling.
Helbling.
Right. And they did a lot of recruiting for universities in their facilities divisions,
Yes,
universities,
sure.
healthcare institutions.
Yeah, universities have fairly large facilities practices.
So they do a lot of that work, and they're part of our real estate practice now. So we kind of doubled in size.
But they also acquired Brimstone, ZRG.
Brimstone's a consulting firm. So ZRG has 4 different business lines. I will give the advertisement briefly for this. So we have executive search. We have interim search, which it's obvious what that is. We have a bunch of consulting services, advisory, coaching, leadership assessment through the acquisition of a company called Brimstone and a company called Bravanti. And then we have something also called RPO, or embedded search, which is really great for the apartment business, because if you grow really quickly and you take over a portfolio and you need to grow your management team all of a sudden, but 3 months later you've grown, we will get you an HR professional, an internal recruiter for 3 months or 4 months, so you get over the hump, and then send them back to us, and you're done with it.
How interesting.
So it's a wonderful model.
It's almost like placing a CFO temporarily in a situation.
That's the interim.
Yeah.
So we do interim, and then we do RPO, which is, again, I need to add a team, but I don't want to add a talent acquisition professional. So we do all of those things at ZRG.
That's amazing. So you're also an early mover in the world of social media.
I think I am, yeah.
Before it was fashionable, even though you're a very fashionable guy,
Thank you.
You formed your own podcast called Leading Voices.
Yep.
And my understanding from talking to you about Leading Voices in real estate, which has done over 200 episodes, over 7 years, is that it really started almost by accident through ULI.
Correct.
That got you involved in it.
Yep.
Talk about that, and talk about your podcast a little bit.
Yeah. So I was a governor of the Urban Land Institute, which is you make a big contribution, you make a donation, and I was bugging ULI because I was a governor. What am I going to do? How can I help ULI? And ULI came back and said, we have an idea. Will you be our Terry Gross? And for those of whom listen to podcasts or know Terry Gross and Fresh Air, she's like the mother of podcasts. And I've been listening to Terry Gross for 20 years.
Really?
Yeah. And I'm like,
Other podcasts, I mean, I've only had mine for a couple of years, but
right.
for 20 years.
Yeah. But she didn't have a podcast. It was an evening show.
An evening show.
On NPR.
Okay.
But I loved that. And so I've been listening to podcasts, and they said, if you want me to do this, and I had already done thought leadership, remember The Wizard of Oz? So I'd been interviewing leaders in the Bay Area, real estate leaders, and talking to them about their business platform, what distinguishes their business platform from other businesses. That was my thesis 10 years ago in this series of articles I was writing.
Right.
So when it came time for ULI to say, go interview leaders of real estate companies, I had a thesis. I had something I wanted to get to, which was that subject.
You and I are in such lockstep about the value of podcasts because I felt, similar to you, that if I could channel thought leadership to people in the industry through my podcast, just like you have through yours,
Right.
that would lead to something very positive, as opposed to just trade publication,
Right.
kind of, PR, if you will.
Yeah, or having a cocktail party at a conference.
Yeah.
Like, this is better to do this.
I think there's much more thought leadership in depth.
Absolutely.
So Matt, the title of this podcast is called Building Better Communities. You've obviously done that just through your career, but you're also, I know, a charitable person. You're involved in several boards. You're involved with trade associations in the industry. Talk a little bit about that part of your life and where that's going.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed it goes in good ways because I'm going to have some more time. So in March I am semi-retiring, and we could discuss what semi means, but semi has the work half and the non-work half. And I am the co-founding board member of a group called Extra Food Marin, which was a food recovery organization in Marin County, California, that's now expanded in San Francisco.
Who are their
And
clients?
it's a Sonoma. So it's a fascinating business. So my best friend from bike riding was creating this idea.
E-biking or mountain biking?
No, this is before e-biking and before mountain biking. But no, we road bike together, and he would keep telling me this idea he had, which was to do food recovery. It was basically if food is going to waste in Marin County, which is fascinating. It's one of the 2 or 3 richest counties in the country.
Sure, you wouldn't think that.
20% of the population is food insecure in Marin County.
Elderly?
No, lots of elderly, but not exclusive. Elderly, rural, Hispanic,
Rural
Black.
portions of the Marin County area.
That's right. The rural portions are poorer than the urban.
And you don't
portion.
hear about that as much. You only hear about the Sausalito portion.
That's exactly
Yeah.
right. And so what the concept of that organization is that we get food donations from grocery stores, farmers markets, restaurants, caterers who have extra food, and then we collect it through volunteers. So there's a volunteerism thing in this business. And then we collect that food, and then we get that food to food pantries run by nonprofits. And it has
Fascinating.
2 things that it does, 3 things. So it does volunteerism, which is a really good thing. It keeps food out of the landfill. So food waste is like one of the top 5 carbon emissions problems that we have. So if we can take away the carbon emission from food waste before it's wasted and get it into people and
It's
in
from the
people's
processing
bellies.
is where you're getting the carbon.
No, it's
Or
from
is it from the
trash.
oh,
You
from
have a
the
lot
trash?
of food that just sits out there in a landfill.
I gotcha. I'm
So
sorry.
instead
yeah.
of the landfill and it's still good food, we get it to people because the amount of food waste is extraordinary.
Before it becomes
That's right.
unedible, shall
That's
we say.
right. Yeah, my daughter got married last weekend, and we took all the cupcakes, all of the eggs. She had like this whole thing. Our freezer was over full, and I took it to a food pantry, and they were like, "Thank you."
All the excess eggs that weren't used.
Yeah, we had like this massive tray of eggs. We had 5 trays of muffins, and if they were in my stomach, that would be a really bad scene. But I took it to a food pantry, and they were like, "Thank you."
How was the wedding?
Wedding was beautiful. Thank you.
Oh,
It
that's
was
great.
just
This is
gorgeous.
your second daughter.
My second daughter. Yeah,
And you have grandchildren.
I have one grandchild.
One
yeah.
in Washington, D.C.
In Washington, D.C., where I spend half my time so I could be around the corner with her.
Well, Matt, it's been a pleasure having you on Building Better Communities in our second season. And you're really an icon in our industry, and I'm really pleased for you to be here.
Thank you. I loved it. Great conversation. Thank you.
Matt.